Hello and welcome to the Sideline Live podcast. My name is Orla Keeling and I am the host of the podcast, where every week we bring you a brand new episode with guests ranging from Olympic champions to local heroes, coaches, support staff, and anybody involved in the world of sport. Each week we will dive into different topics, including current affairs in sport, identity, skill, mindset, coaching, and also shine a light on those flying under the radar. So tune in every week for brand new episodes, new stories, and new insights you've never heard before. Okay, delighted to finally sit down with the one and only Michelle O'Connor. Probably 2 years out from chatting about getting on the podcast for the first time. Michelle, how are you getting on?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's a real pleasure. And probably a lot of that 2 year wait is my fault, so I do apologize for that.
No, a lot of that is also mine. I wasn't sure how to start it off, but I will ask, as a Kerry woman, how are you being let in the door of Cork camogie?
Oh, that's a great question. It's one thing I love to talk about, and it's a bit of kind of a crack and banter. I think when you start out with any team, you have to bring a bit of like authenticity and a bit of yourself in the environment. So one of the first things I always put up on a slide, is particularly when I'm introducing myself, is that I'm a very proud Kerry woman. And it's gas when I first went in with Cork in 2023. We did the first session down below in the park in Parky Queeve, and bang, this I'm a very proud Kerry woman came up on the screen. And I actually think Hannah Looney booed me, because then I had a photograph of the Kerry LGK team and what I'd done with them like in the previous 3 years. So I think gradually over time and through relationships, and once the girls got to know me, they were like, ah, Jesus, she's not that bad.
They were like, she's not the imposter.
Not the imposter, not the imposter at all. But no, I think we had a running joke as well around the place that it took a Kerry woman and a Limerick man in Liam Cronin to come and help Cork win an All Ireland. So that's something that we can kind of hold over them.
Exactly,
Yeah.
100%. But come here, you did have a quite a decent playing career as well, Michelle. Do you start there in terms of growing up? You were like 16, being brought into the Kerry Senior Ladies football team.
Yeah, I would have played underage with Kerry all the way up. I think I was called in at initially at 15, because it was so different times back then, just as kind of an introductory period. But my parents kind of felt, look, you are a bit too young here. And there was a girl at home, Denise Hallisey. She was a prolific athlete and a wing back for Kerry for years, and she just kind of sustained a back injury. So I think that time kind of like a few parents were kind of holding off. But at 16 I did get the call up, because I was 4 year Kerry minor. I was minor chosen captain in my final year as minor. So that transition was amazing. It's everything you want as a child. Everything that you dream of is to put on the jersey and represent your county. So that was a privilege to play with them. And then I was with them for 2 seasons. Unfortunately hit glandular fever in my leaving cert year, and that was just kind of a steamroll effect. That would have been the year that I would have been the minor captain as well. And we were very successful in the school with basketball teams and soccer and stuff. We got trials and things abroad. But glandular fever hit, first ACL injury hit. And then it was just a downward kind of spiral after that, unfortunately. Kind of played a huge factor in me kind of retiring out of the sport until this year.
Oh, the comeback is on, is it?
Comeback is on. Comeback is on. Got the all clear. So yeah, it's a long road, but got the all clear. So I'm actually going to be transferring to, I think, a team in Cork. So the Cork people will have to take me in again.
Brilliant. Come here, I do want to ask briefly on. We were chatting before we hit record. I've had a significant injury as well, and to kind of the lead up to having really big surgery, it got a good few years of just not being able to play and injuries and niggles. And it's hard, as I think, as an athlete, when your identity and you're competitive. Like, my worst enemy in terms of, I'm so competitive. I find it hard not to be able to compete at the level I once was. How do you deal with that? And even, if you've any anecdotes or insights from your clients, like, it's something that I haven't spoken about a lot on this, but it's hard.
Yeah, it's huge. I think, like, to be honest, the reason why I do what I do today is because of my injuries and my past. I think particularly, when you do the first ACL, you do have kind of a different mindset of like gung ho, let's rehab, how can we get this, get surgery done kind of straight away, and then you're just building back to come back. Then bang, you're hit with it again, a second ACL, which I actually didn't really struggle, I'd say, on the first two, but when the third one came, it was like my mental health like was significantly affected. And at the time, like there was no access to support systems. I was a registered player. I thought I'd paid my registration, got the receipt. Unfortunately, just the club there was handling errors with finance. And then I ended up doing my ACL in an intermediate county final, which was actually my trial match to come back in with Kerry for the following season. And then I found out on the Tuesday that unfortunately just the registration hadn't gone through, and that I wouldn't be have access to any support or any like services and things like that. So I did take a drastic dip in terms of my mental health. And then I thought, you know what, I'm gonna have to do something about this for me, but also for other people. So I suppose having worked in the healthcare industry and always being like fascinated by like human behavior and what makes us tick and things like that, I just felt, look, there's an avenue here for players and for athletes and for support. So why not kind of look towards that and build a niche? But you're spot on in terms of saying that it has a huge impact on your identity and who you are. A lot of our makeup as children, particularly because Gaelic Games is at the forefront of nearly every community in Ireland. It is a huge part of who you are. When it's ripped away from you, it is debilitating.
Absolutely. There's a great line. LeBron James has it for the last like 10 years or so. More than an athlete. And I
Yeah.
think to people that have had, whether it's an identity crisis or their identity wrapped up in sport and
Hmm.
unable to play, it's a line that I like using and thinking of, because it's like I'm more than just sport. And I think the biggest thing I've learned from doing this is I was a player, and I had that big injury, and now I have a totally different relationship with sport, and it's more than just being a player. It's now doing this, for example, or coaching a team, or going down to watch and doing different things. And it's like, I think the line as well, like, don't let sport use you, use sport, comes to mind, of finding your niche, as you say. And you found your niche in kind of, or not your niche, it's more your next kind of relationship with sport. And I feel like that's probably what you're doing now.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Um, it definitely is. It definitely is. And I think, when you go through something yourself, like, like life experience does alter your path or alter your direction. And, I would have done my thesis on this. And from the research, and I acutely looked at the LGFA and camogie structures, like every inter-county athlete that I spoke to at the time when I did my thesis, like there was zero psychological support. Um, which is obviously huge, because the research shows that, like, obviously, while the injury is a physical injury, there's a lot of other holistic issues outside of that tends to be affected. Like the mental health, your emotional health and well-being, as well as things like social supports. You're constantly in these environments with your best friends and your peers, and all of a sudden that's ripped away from you. Especially with like inter-county teams as well. Sometimes you're like the key stakeholders in those organizations, like you're a product too at the end of the day, in lots of ways, unfortunately. So they see you as a product, and when you're injured and you're put to the side, like what use are you? And that was something I like, not saying that when I played with Kerry Ladies at the time, but that's certainly the way I felt, was that, I love this sport. I had given so much time and commitment into it, but got nothing back when I wasn't needed, and that's something too that a lot of athletes tend to face.
Yeah, when you're dropped or when you retire. And Damien Lawler has a great book. It's called When the World Stops Watching, and it's when the
Fantastic
world
book.
continues to spin and
Hmm.
you're not there. And that's really hard, and that's hard to, and I don't think there's enough. And I actually think I'm going to try do an episode on it, try get a couple of retired athletes, whether they retired through their own choice or through injury or through other things, on, because I don't think it's something that we speak enough about in sport,
Hmm.
of stepping away or retiring or being forced to step away. Because, and I had a great chat with Shane Keegan before, and his one of the biggest things I learned from him was when he was a professional soccer manager with Dundalk and other teams in Ireland, League of Ireland. He learned, it's like, look ahead to how this will end, because it
Hmm.
will come to an end. And I think we don't really, as players, put enough into, well, this is going to end eventually, so how do I want it to go if I have a choice? Because sometimes you don't, whether it's injury or other things.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. That's a great book, and I listened to that podcast with Shane as well. And that's, I think, where structures now need to implement, things like psychology and support services to help athletes, manage and cope and regulate and come to terms with that fast approaching future piece. There's so much work that needs to be done in terms of that. So I'd definitely be listening to that podcast if you do it.
Come here. One of the other things I was thinking about was we're in GEA, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, which I think is just so backwards thinking for a game that we're trying to push and call it professional. I don't professional on grass. But I don't think we're professional in much else that we do. There's a call for like central or national kind of monitoring and strength conditioning. Is there scope for central and national structures for psychological support?
Oh, 100%. I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be. I think it's fantastic. I think there's been a huge jump maybe in the last 10, 15 years in terms of bringing on psychological support for athletes. But I feel like what they tend to do, and I've seen this in intercounty structures, is they dangle the carrot in front of you and say, look, here, we're going to support you in X, Y, and Z. And then they tend to pull a service, unnecessarily. So there is definitely scope to look at infiltrating such services. And like if you do look at the research, like 60% of the latent talent or potential of an individual is based on three things. Those three things are one, the team that you're a part of, two, the culture, the club that you're a part of, or the team and the organization. But the third piece is the access to resources, you know. And I think there has to be that overload. Like I always say that when somebody goes in terms of like strength and conditioning for the physical body, and conditioning physical muscles, you have to be able to do the same with your mind. In any sport that involves the body, it's the mind that dictates everything. It's like the voice of reason, or it's the voice or the captain of your ship. So there would be definitely, I think, there is a need or a call to infiltrate services, particularly in relation to psychology.
I've written down team culture and access to resources. I said to you when we started, I purposely haven't written down many questions because I know we're going to go down rabbit holes. So team culture and access to resources? Do you think determines the success of an athlete? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so like they've done research. This came out of studies over in the US, but they were saying that when they were looking at team environments and individuals and potential and people, they said that 60% of the latent talent that an individual or a team has is based off three core components. So if you don't have a good, like in terms of being a part of a team and a good ethos and a good value system and a core set of beliefs and an identity, that's obviously going to have an effect on your potential. It's the same with the culture that you come from. If we think of, again, going back to GA terms and you look at like county board systems or club systems at home, if you don't have the support and the grounds and the core foundations to build from there, then that's obviously going to have an impact on your potential. And then obviously the third piece is the access to resources. I remember when I did my thesis back couple of years ago. I don't want to give away my age now. Um, but in doing that a couple of years ago, one thing that came out of it was that like even at intercounty levels, and it came from both LGFA and camogie structures, was sometimes there wasn't even access to physios, at that level. Um, like I know this year with the Cork camogie team, as of yet, there's no psychologist. It's crazy to think that we're in 2025 and the access to resources, you're asking players to sacrifice, go to training 3 and 4 times a week. You are a professional athlete. Anybody that puts on any intercounty jersey across the country is doing so like a professional. So the least that they deserve in terms of their rights should be access to all levels of support.
100%. And that's why I think we let ourselves down. And what I meant by we're professional in every sense on the pitch and on the grass is, as you say, it's the dedication and the commitment of the players and the management teams, not to forget what the efforts the management teams go through. But it's everything else that I just think we really let ourselves down on. And actually, we let the players down. It's actually not about me or you, Michelle, who are on this call. It's about the girls that are out in Porky today, in Parnell Park, or across the country that are being, I think, let down by
Mm-hmm.
not having the proper structures off the pitch.
Yeah, 100%. I think we've seen that even with the motion with the LGFA there recently with the injury fund. Like to me, that is shocking. I know you're smiling there now, but it is shocking, that even motion is proposed, and thank God the GPA are fighting it. And that's the one thing I think when we look at sport, we just see again athletes as entities. They're so much more than that. They're human beings, they're people. And I think that's where we have to bring that to the forefront in everything that we do.
I do want to ask Michelle, when you compare, going back to your playing career a little bit, but when you compare what the game and the structures were like, and I don't just mean to look at Kerry, but that's your experience. When you compare that to what it is now,
Mm,
what's the biggest difference from your perspective?
yeah. I think the culture is probably one of the biggest things that's changed. my time, so I was there part of the initially the 2010, 2011, and 2012 season. So they would have got to the All Ireland final in the 2012 season. There was a good manager at the time. He definitely, I think, brought up standards to a degree, but in comparison to what's there today, it's totally different. I think now, like if we're talking about Kerry Ladies, I think they have a very defined identity. They know who they are, they know their value systems, they know their core beliefs. And the one thing that I'd always admire, and I remember texting Deck and Dara prior to the All Ireland final and afterwards. And I just said, like, what you guys have accomplished in the last 5 years will live on for generations. What they've done, they just brought, and it wasn't just them, like their backroom team. Like, I actually can't stress how amazing their backroom team was. And the individuals involved, from Anne Marie O'Donoghue initially, to Geraldine O'Shea, to Cass Buckley, to Eric. Like, they formulated an amazing professionalism, and I think they just built a platform of belief, and that was the thing that was lacking, I think, down in Kerry for years. And that was one of the reasons why the lads had asked me to initially come on. Was they were saying, look, Michelle, we have this kind of unlimited, untapped group here of potential, and we're just looking for something different where we can try and instill belief. And that was my main purpose and goal when I went in working with them in terms of a sports psych point of view. And that probably wasn't there when in my time. Like, very much when I started out as a 16-year-old, there was no such thing as psychology. There was rarely access to physiotherapists. I remember I transitioned from, after winning a minor All Ireland, into the senior setup. And at that time, I was kind of struggling with niggles and injuries in my calves and in my knees. And I remember I was told that I had to get like fit in 3 weeks, and I was running post to post every night for 3 weeks, sprinting. It was just a different, it was just bizarre. And I remember one time being at the side of the pitch, 16 years old, like vomiting because of how far I was pushed in terms of my physical body. And I got a clump at the back of the neck, told to get up, slap on the back, and go again. Whereas that wouldn't happen nowadays. Thankfully, it's a completely different environment. But definitely, like, credit to the lads in the county board. Like, Sean Walsh was, I think, was one of the best things to ever come to Kerry Ladies in terms of his role as a chairperson, and just building from that year in, year out.
Because you did build. You went from, I heard you speak about this before, 12 months to the 22 final. 12 months ago, you were in a relegation battle against Tipperary.
Yeah.
And the biggest difference actually was belief. It wasn't really, like, there was obviously every team evolves every year and there's little changes, but the only real major difference was belief. So when I ask you, like, what, not a definition, but what does the word belief actually mean?
Yeah, I suppose, like, when we look at belief, we have to look at confidence. Like, confidence by definition is belief in your own ability to execute a specific task or skill. That's it by definition. But belief, and this is where people tend to get it wrong, belief is all internal. It starts within. It starts with your inner dialogue, what you speak to yourself. Um, what you're telling yourself and communicating with yourself on a continuous basis. And that's what we had to change in Kerry, was how we spoke to ourselves. The girls would identify themselves as maybe not good enough, or losers, or when they get to the competitive edge, or the serious games and championships, that they would slow down. And, like, again, it comes back to the point that I said to you at the start. Like, the mind is the thing that dictates everything else. It's that 6-inch playing field between your two ears. That's what controls everything in terms of physical performance. So that's where we kind of had to really, really target, and just change the narrative that we had been telling ourselves for 10 years, that Kerry Ladies was not good enough. To actually show, look, here, girls, we're going to work from a strengths based approach, solution based approach, and apply ourselves appropriately here. And, like, that started with the physical work that the lads did in terms of the technical and the tactical piece, and then you brought in, like, Cass Buckley and Eric to in terms of the gym and the strength and conditioning, and then slowly you just start to build that evidence of undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. And that's kind of how we built that system down in Kerry.
Wow. There's a line that comes to mind. Kevin McManaman shared it in a webinar during COVID. Fact or fiction. He was like,
Yes.
challenge the beliefs. Is it fact or fiction? I used that recently with a player, no longer coach them, but I've kept in touch, and she was kind of stepping up to another level of playing. And I said, is it totally new? Or is it something that you've done before, and listed out all the common things that she had done? Like, it
Mm-hmm.
was obviously a different team now going into it. So it's like fact or fiction. And
Love
she
it.
said
Yeah.
thanks, and I don't know if it ever resonated with her, but when Kev said that in the webinar, I was like, God, that makes a lot of sense. But when you speak about the 6 inches, in, you know, in between the two ears. I had a chat with Liam Sheedy in Croke Park last year at the All Ireland hurling semi final. I'm dying to get him on the podcast. Someday I will have him on. And he was like, yeah, it's the biggest thing that we went after and
Mm,
what we did. And they got who else other than the woman herself, Caroline Curd, who
correct.
again I'm dying to talk to,
Come here.
dying.
If you are going to talk to her, I'll join that as well.
Yeah,
I'd love that.
100%,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
She's on. We actually did it. Someone asked me before what my dream dinner party was because I said I can't pick one, and it was her, Liam Sheedy, Jim McGuinness, Jim Gavin, and I can't remember who the other one was. And I'm like, if I can get them in the room together, oh my god, I won't say a thing. I'll just be listening.
I know, I know, I know. I think like she's actually a huge part of why I've done what I wanted to do. Like she was such an inspiration, and just like I remember sitting in one of her talks before. She is incredible at what she does. So I'd be the waiter for that dinner if you don't mind.
I actually, do you know what? I was so impressed. I went down to a conference in Limerick 2 years ago now, in UL, and she was she was one of the kind of headline speakers at it, and she was actually the reason why I ended up going. It's like there's a few people that I will just go to hear them speak, and she's one of them, and I was just blown away by her. What is it for you though, Michelle? What's that impresses
Oh,
you about
just
Caroline?
everything she embodies, like everything, like one thing I always say, like the value system that I work off as a professional is like people first, athlete or player second. And like that generates a lot of that work generates from her and creating that kind of caring and nurturing environment. And looking at the holistic work that she does. She doesn't just look at you, the athlete, and what you can do in a performance, but it's everything external to that and outside of that. And that just I remember at the time when I first heard her speak, that's what fueled my desire. I was like, oh my God, like everything she's saying here is sinking or it's resonating with me or it's setting the right kind of seeds. And then it just kind of fuelified me and my desire to want to pursue a career in this. Because obviously I have access to this outside, like I still work with Just the Child and Family Agency and have done for many years with children and young people. So I've always, as I said, always been fascinated with how people tick, like why do we behave what we do, why are we conditioned the way that we are. Um, so then why not obviously dip that into sport, which was a huge part of my identity. So yeah, she was fascinating. I'm always like I could go see her every day, like it's one of those people and you'd be always in awe of her.
One of the things she said, and I remember I wrote down, and just one of the things I distinctly remember was how she starts with a team is she goes straight to the captain first. So I'll pose the same question to you. How do you start with a team?
Yeah, I would be doing a similar approach. See, the thing is, the other thing too is like one thing that I would have brought into Cork is these things called leadership groups. Okay, so like what we do is we'd identify like five, and I did this down with the Kerry Ladies as well, and lots of other kind of club teams across the country. But you pick five or six leaders, but these leaders are not your usual typical leaders. They're not the ones that go out and get 1-4, 1-5, make blocks at the in line or like things like that. But they just had all of the qualities of emotional intelligence. So all those human skills and behaviors, they were empathic. They had active listening skills. They could give and receive feedback. And once I kind of was able to pinpoint or target those specific people, like by them creating their own kind of little mini cultures in those leadership groups, that was really key in all of us kind of coming together and transcending the right type of message. So I think like you do have to go after like the big personalities and the big names, which let's say like in Cork camogie there is a lot. There's a few probably that jump to mind that are big characters and definitely would have had engagement and conversations with them from the very get-go and the start.
Give us an insight. So I was going to stop you there and ask you one of those. I think you noticed and you gave them quickly. But for a coach, let's say that's listening, that wants to do something similar with leadership groups, something I'd be very familiar with and interested in as well. But if they want to kind of go after those skills or attributes you mentioned, give us a couple of signposts just to break it in even further.
Yeah, no, I suppose like one of the biggest thing again, it comes back to almost like authenticity, like what makes each person in this environment them, like what uniquely different traits do they bring as a person to here into this environment. And like that's one of the things that I would do in any setup is I try to get to know everybody on an individual level. And I learned this from like Alex Ferguson at Man United. The reason why he was such a successful manager, it was regardless if you were the dinner lady or you were like a CEO, like he knew everything about you. He knew all about your family. He knew all like your mechanisms, your ticks, your triggers, and that's essentially what you kind of do in an environment. And that's the role for, I think, for a coach and a manager now. Like when we talk about leadership, it's not about rank, it's not about superiority, it's not about being in charge. What it's actually about is allowing others around you to rise in your charge, if that kind of makes sense. So it's all about getting to know the individual as a person and then as an athlete. Because I think if you get to the deep rootedness of who they are, then obviously that will purify and help your decisions in picking those leaders for those leadership groups. So that kind of
Yeah, no, 100%. And it resonates with me because I remember Clean O'Connor, who is a coach I've actually worked with personally, and I had her on the podcast, and I just think is just phenomenal. I asked her what makes the best of the best. That question I love asking
mhm.
people, sometimes chasing people down a corridor. What makes the best the best? She said, do you make it easy for the people around you to be brilliant? And I think that's what you were saying. I got into it there. So let's say, for example, I'm joining the Cork senior camogie team and I'm starting out for the first time. So we go for our one-to-one chat. How do you, like, let's say it's on the Zoom call, we
Mhm.
press start. How do you start and what do you ask me first off?
Yeah, I suppose first of all, I'd opt always to stay away from the Zoom call as initial point of contact, just because what I tend to do with athletes is I think, obviously a lot of people can be resistant to psychology because somehow they think that you're like a mind reader and you're going to learn all the worst things and all the worst traits and qualities about them. When actually that's not the case at all. So what I'd always advise is, especially anybody new, as you said, particularly young people coming into the setup, is there any chance you meet me for a cup of coffee in an informal setting and we just get to know each other? Like that's the basic level because at the core of our work is relationships, and it is really, really important that we can establish a working relationship. So it is stripping it all back. It's not going straight into focusing on sports psychology and enhancing performance. It's actually just getting to know you as a person, whether you have any questions about what I might do, and just to build up that rapport and relationship is really, really key. So that would be my main starting point. If I had to go to Zoom, obviously you would have to go to Zoom. But the one thing I love about in-person contact is, when you're on a screen and you're on a Zoom, like I can really see a head and shoulders, but like what I can't see is underneath the table there, your legs could be going 90, or you're constantly pulling pens in and out, you're twisting your hair, you're playing with your fingernails, whereas you'd get all that in an in-person setting. So that's why I always opt for those informal type conversations first, just to get to know the person as a person first, and then as an athlete.
So you're asking family, college, work, other
Exactly.
hobbies.
Yeah, yeah. Because the likelihood, like if you are a successful team, like thankfully, like that Cork Camogie are and were, like one day you're going to be meeting these people as well. You're going to be meeting the families at the banquets, you're going to be meeting the friends, you're going to be meeting the partners. So it is important that like relationship is at the forefront of everything that you do. Um, and those, as I said, those like softer skills, those human skills, of like active listening and empathy and compassion, like all those have to be at the very forefront of our work in order for this trust process to work. Because what a lot of people don't realize is with trust, like trust is the two-way thing. If I'm going to trust you, you have to be able to trust me. If I'm going to respect you, you're going to have to respect me. If I'm going to influence you, I need to allow you to also influence me.
Totally. Yeah, totally. The thing I heard you speak on a podcast before about the buy-in clause. You do have that at the beginning of a year. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, the buying clause, I love that. Yeah, no, it is. It's a player contract. The reason, I suppose, there's a combination of different reasons why I do it, but obviously the biggest one is around responsibility and accountability. Like the way I always view things is that like your time is extremely precious, my time is extremely precious. If you are giving 110% to things in terms of your physical performance, like strength and conditioning, stuff like that, I want you to apply yourself exactly the same way when you're with me and when you're doing work in terms of psychology. So it is that accountability and responsibility piece. It's also an element of respect as well, I find. And then you obviously have the ethical side of it too, around duty of care and stuff like that. So I think when all of us put a pen to paper, it kind of just makes it more structured. Um, so I would always and have done always in my practice is the player contract piece. I think it is really, really important.
The word we've talked about it kind of already. Professionalism. What does it mean to be whether you're a professional in terms of getting paid or the standards, kind of chasing really that standards piece. What does it mean to be a professional, Michelle, from what you've seen?
That's a great question. That is a great question. What does it mean to be a professional? I think always like, again, like just to build a platform where you can be your best self. You know, I think in psychology, we see these equations of like, oh, performance is equal to your potential minus your interferences and things like that. So, like, we do have an unlimited, untapped amount of potential. How we get into that is by applying ourselves correctly. So when I do think of the word professionalism, like I think for me in my specific role, it's about how can I get the best from you and how do I build a platform for you to excel. And that's what professionalism is for me, I suppose, for athletes. And when going back many, many moons ago, when potentially was an athlete or could identify as an athlete, uh, again, it was all about applications and how I applied myself, how much time and commitment I give to the cause or to the purpose, and what was the desire and what was the goal to ascertain that.
How do you teach that to a kid that has talent, works kind of hard, is probably gonna that the word potential, which I don't really like because I think potential is only on paper, as Shane Renan told me on this podcast. But like, how do you teach that to a kid that is going somewhere in whatever discipline or sport that they're in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, I think it comes back to like interpersonal and intrapersonal and interpersonal skills. I think like when we look at players, particularly in that age bracket, again, it just comes down to talent. But things like your attitude is so big and so huge and so influential. We need to look at more external factors than just talent alone or talent itself. And I remember when I first started out, I spoke to Bill Bezic, which was a sports psychologist that was with United again a couple of years ago, and he said to me that give me an athlete with a C or a D talent but an A attitude and I'll get them in a Man United jersey in a day. Whereas if you flip it and if you had a player that had an A talent but had a C or D attitude, that's when you create problems. So I think we need to look at the softer skills again, um, in order to help transition and help teenagers and things like that. I got a great question this morning when I was doing presentation down in Douglas, and it came from an under 15 coach who had asked me saying, "Look, Michelle, we're having one or two of the teenage lads, and they're a bit disgruntled in terms of their behaviours. What would you do or what would you say, and how do we do that? Because I find that I'm being really reactive as a coach." And I just said, sometimes little things, remember bringing care to the human element of environments is really, really key. But just doing little things, like I always say, the reason why somebody is acting out, there's obviously a trigger or something behind why they're behaving. So it could be just simply just putting a hand around a young person or pulling them to one side out of the environment, bringing their attention away from what's triggering them potentially and actually just being like, are you okay? What's going on for you? So again, bringing that human element and that side to to your practice, I think is key.
The human piece, and you've mentioned a couple of times what makes you tick. Also, a great podcast as well. Would recommend that if you haven't listened yet. Um, what makes humans tick from what you've seen, and not just sport? Interested to
Mm,
pull on your professional experience as well.
yeah, another great question. Or you're flying with them today. Yeah, no, what makes people take again a variety of things. I think when we look at the deep rootedness of who we are, so like, you hear Jerry Huzzy speak about this quite often, but like it's kind of like an onion, and you have outer layers, and then obviously you have to tap into it. But at the very core of who we are is our identity. It's the set of values and set of beliefs that we have. Everything that we do, can often come from that. And I always say when you find your why, you kind of find your way in life. Um, so that's kind of the deep rootedness of who you are, especially I think, as children and like psychodynamics has taught us this, that, a lot of our belief systems are formulated as a child. We work off a theta brainwave, which is essentially like mass downloading and processing and a higher frequency from 0 to 8 years old. So a lot of who we are is developed in those early years. Um, so it is really, really key that we do look inward and the deep rootedness of ourselves in order to understand ourselves, understand why we think the way we think, understand why we act the way we do, and our behaviors and such not. So yeah, definitely I think looking inwardly at yourself is the first point of protocol. And that then will kind of seep through and dictate other areas and factors in your life. I've seen that both in healthcare and in sport.
Yeah. So when you look at a sports team then, and let's say I was to go into a group like Cork, let's say I show up tomorrow to training and I ask the whole group what's their why and what makes them tick. What is it in elite sport that makes athletes tick?
Again, every team is uniquely different from another. Like if I was to take the comparison of Cork camogie and the Kerry Ladies, Kerry Ladies, which we spoke about, was around belief and confidence and instilling that growth. Cork, when the issue was presenting, was we can't turn up on our final day. We can't. We have this incredible talent. We do the hard work, the dedication and success, but like why can't we get over the line? And what we had to do in the 2023 season under Matthew Toomey, and when I speak about Matt, like Matthew is one of the best managers I have ever had the pleasure of working alongside. Again, like this man, like, he's the people's manager. That's what I always say. But we had to strip it back completely. We had to find out the reasons, like what are we looking for, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses. And I remember I do this profiling. It's just use of technology again, just to, I think, like there's great clarity when we use technology in terms of understanding what's going well in teams and stuff like that. But one of the things that came up, it was like there was a 93 percentile saying that we had an issue with mentality and mindset. That came back, and I only showed that on the presentation board this morning down in Douglas. But like that was huge. We had to target that area specifically and then like go into another layer deeper. Like, what is it about mentality and mindset? Things like then I think, which was very evident when we lost in the league final against Galway, was that girls were coming and reporting when we stripped back, got everyone into a room and said, right, guys, like what's the problem here? What's going on? What come on, you need to, you need to tell us because you're the experts on the ground. And one of them said, you know what, Jesus, I looked up at the board 45 minutes and we were up by, I don't know, a point or two. And then I was like, oh no, it's going to happen again. They're going to come back. They're going to pull back. So it was about like, and that was the penny that dropped. I remember that time in that April, it was like, okay, so here we have an internal dialogue issue. We're building a narrative, and I always say like your expectancy determines your outcome. So if you expect to constantly be looking behind your back at like if it's Galway or Kilkenny or Tipperary coming at you, like your vision is in the wrong place completely. So it was about transcending that and changing our focus as such, which we did. Thankfully, we had the dip in April, then lost, went into Munster Championship, lost against Waterford, best thing that ever happened to us, and then we were able to rise up from that.
We hear that a lot when people, get very honest and vulnerable in a room. I don't really want to go into that. What I want to ask about that is how do you hold that space as a practitioner? Because that's a very delicate line
Hmm.
and kind of on a cliff's edge of people being very vulnerable and honest can be taken in one way or the other. So how do you keep it on and balance that line?
Yeah, again, it depends again in the environment that you're in. Like, two stories jump out to me, one with Cork and one with Kerry Ladies. But the one that jumps out to me most is the one with Kerry Ladies. We were playing Cork down below in Parky Queeve, and I think we were 10 or 11 points up with 6, 7 minutes to
I remember
go.
that
Yeah,
23 Munster final.
that was it. Yeah. And came back and it leveled it. And I remember like just the whole energy of the team just was seeped, gone, you know. And I pulled the girls out on the pitch and we went to the side and I was like, okay, guys, we're actually going to do a review right now. We're going to do a review. Everyone get into the dressing room and we'll sit down. So we all walked into the dressing room and looked around the girls, the team, incredible team, such like fantastic. Can't speak about high enough about them. But I remember being in there and I was like, right, guys, it is time now to be honest. Okay, what is it? What's gone wrong? And it turned out, and I hope the girls won't mind me saying this, but it turned out that when we look at like 1 to 15, our number 3 and 6 had identified that they had a fear of Cork. They had never beaten them. And that when the clock started to tick, they started to derail. And if you have your stem of your team starting to derail 6 minutes to go, obviously that's going to filter through. So like that was an amazing clarity piece, I think. And again, like when you're saying like how do you cater for vulnerability in that environment, you have to be able to ask for honesty, you know, and you have to have that openness. And I think that was kind of the flip with Kerry, was that, like it's the psychological safety piece, you know, that we had created an environment for everyone to say, rather than, the other where there's like danger in terms of safety or danger in terms of psychological environments, is that blaming others, not afraid to admit mistakes. Whereas we built a totally different system, and it was about putting your hand up, saying how you feel, what are the mistakes here, and that was a key turning point, I think, in propelling us forward then, so honesty, openness, being okay with not being okay, they're kind of the key elements in those settings.
The piece about the Cork thing, I think, is just, isn't that so indicative of not just ladies football, like the Cork brand in ladies football for that 12 years of just pure dominance that they had over the game. You have Noelle Healy coming out saying, we won the All Ireland in 17, but it was beating Cork in 18, where you're like, we're here, like we are here to compete. And it's those, you look at Kerry in the men's, you look at Dublin, you look at Galway beating Dublin last year, and just the triumph in beating the Dubs, and that narrative that even is instilled in underage, where you've got underage teams and all you hear is, oh, but what about Cork when we
Mm-hmm.
reach the All Ireland? And it's like, lads, what are we even talking about? Like, we're like, this is underage. We're not even talking
Mm-hmm.
about adult. Like, it's that, isn't it funny, the power of the narrative and the brand of a certain, even the crest or the colours of a county, that can have such an influence
Yeah.
over a
Oh,
player.
massively. And like that's the thing. It's like dangling the carrot or setting the seed. Is that like it only takes a few people to set a bad seed. This all started at one point where somebody set the seed at Cork or this, that, and the other. And like it's so funny because I never really understood it as a player. Like if you showed, I remember my best games were always against Cork, whether that was the forward or as a goalkeeper. Um, Whenever I saw that red jersey, it was like showing red to a bull. Do you know? And like I never used to let outside external talk affect me as such. But like speaking of, we'll say like the Kerry girls at that time, like there was senior girls that had 10, 12, 13 years service in the jersey and had never beaten Cork. And it was again that narrative, we underperform against them, we lose against them all the time, we have a fear of them. So like it was that seed was so deep rooted in terms of that belief system. Again, everything comes back to your identity and your belief. We had to get rid of that completely. um but yeah, it is amazing to see, like, I do, like, personally think this year, I think Cork are on the rise. I think they're coming back. um I think, which will be an interesting, I think, for the LGFA, I think there needs to be a bit of urgency in terms of teams competing at the top. So it will be an interesting season, I think, this year.
For Absolutely, no, I definitely will. For a coach listening, I'll take the club game as an example. Actually, men's football and ladies football, Kilmacud Crokes have been the name on the tips of everyone's tongues, right? And even you look at the ladies, I don't think, like, for me last year, I couldn't, like, fully respect Crokes, absolutely 100%. But the narrative in the media at one point was, oh, Kilmacud Crokes are on the rise now and they've got a great chance. And they did, and absolutely they did. But I was like, if I was Kilkerran and Clonbyrne and I'm going for four in a row and all I'm hearing is about Crokes, I'd be rubbing the hands together, delighted, putting all the newspaper articles out in the dressing room. So you've, for example, let's say there's a club manager now that's going to face Kilkerran
Mm.
and Clonbyrne in a Galway, championship game now, and they're facing the four in a row All Ireland champions, and they have that narrative of, we never perform, we never, that lack of self belief. What should that team do? Is it sitting in a room and talking about it and writing down all those things,
Again,
or like what's the
again,
best way of
like
doing it?
every team is unique. Like you're gonna have some athletes that if you threw the paper in front of them or threw them up and displayed them all over the walls, it would evoke an emotional reaction for them to perform well. Then you have the other side of it where it'll almost inwardly have an effect on athletes. So again, it's about getting to really know your team. I think that's the main starting point for all of this, is to really get to know your team, know the people around you, what makes them tick, and what makes them go. And I remember this issue actually came up with Cork, with the whole Galway thing, and what Galway meant to Cork. And I just remember sitting down with Amy O'Connor in for an informal kind of type session, and I just said, Amy, we have to break the cycle just once. She was like, "Oh my God, we have to what?" I said, "You just have to break the cycle just once." And that became our theme in 2023. Yeah, okay, let Galway win the league. Fine, grand. That's not the war, that's the battle. And then it was like, okay, let them win the round robin, grand. But when it comes All Ireland series time, we just have to break the cycle just once. you know, and that's the message that we would transcend, and that like fuelified every performance. And I think sometimes, coaches and management teams can get caught up in the externals all of the time. But like I know with Cork, even this year, we had a total like shutdown after media night. Nobody was to look at anything. It was just focus on what's inside the four walls of this dressing room. That's all that counts. That's all important. If we just stick to our processes, stick to our own games, we know that we have the talent and the capabilities to win this All Ireland. And that was it, So again, know your team, know your environment. Kerry would have been very, very different then. The lads would have displayed comments up all over the walls in every dressing room that we went into. So it is different for different environments, So it is important just about understanding who we are and again what makes us tick.
Yeah, 100%. I because that was actually a question I'd written down. It was one of the girls. They were posing for pictures in the dressing room after the All Ireland win this year, and there was a flag on the wall with all the stars of all the wins, and I'm assuming that was the legacy piece, the broader vision. People speak about. You've heard like the Ryder Cup, for example. Paul McGinley was talking about how they had all the wins, totted up on the wall and the visual piece. I'm assuming that was the same
100%,
idea.
because the one thing that I adore about the girls in Cork is that when like something like that goes up on the wall, like that's your stack of undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. There is a legacy there. You've contributed to the stars on the wall. And like when they look at that and when they saw the star missing for 5 years or so, like Matthew actually told me, I remember at the time, he said in the reign of like Paddy Murray and things, that flag was used and then it went away for a couple of years and then it circulated back up in 2023. And that was always what used to fuelify the girls. Again, is seeing that, and we used to hang it up. Like I know last year it was hung up in the side room in Croke Park. The year before it was hung up front line and center. I actually have a picture. I'll send you it. But but if you notice anybody that goes into like took any photography photographs, everywhere displayed in the room was things like photographs of families, photographs of, like
Yeah.
for instance, like Laura Hayes with Orla Cotter when she was a young girl and paint across her forehead. It was Ciara Sullivan's family hanging up to the right. It was Ash Thompson lifting the All Ireland in 2015, in 2015. Like you have to display those things because cues are really important in your environment, especially because we're visual beings. And to be able to tap back into them and have that constant reminder is key, you know.
But as you say, it's the right thing for the group, because that could do the other thing for another set of people
Yeah,
or a team.
100%, 100%. And again, this is all trial and error. Like this is stuff that we would have gone through earlier in the year. It would have been like we would have gone through the process of, putting up like our specific calls and things in different locations. Did that work there? No, okay, that didn't work there. It's all about like clarity and adjusting what works well, so that like you're not infiltrating these things in an All Ireland quarterfinal, semi-final, and final. It's you're building it from day one. It's those like 1% differences that come All Ireland final day, we have a bank of 20 or 30% of work that is in within our control and that we can bank on and then we can propel forward.
Because that was one of the things I talked to Shane Hassett about. For anyone that hasn't listened, it was coach with the Clare senior hurling team. Obviously, last year went on to win the All Ireland. What he was saying, I actually took it from him. I've robbed it from him, which is why I'm referencing him. The science of Crow Park and balancing. Like I'm really interested in that. Even having the flags, and you see different counties having flags and different things and photos and family things, like managing going to an away dressing room, an unfamiliar
Mm-hmm.
environment, and then when you get to Ireland final day at Crow Park, how important is making your space actually your own space, because it isn't. It's an away dressing room, or it's a Crow Park dressing room.
100%. Yeah. And the thing is, you want to replicate your environment all of the time. Like if something is completely new to you, it's potentially has the ability to unrattle you. We as human beings, we like comfort. We work very well off our comfort zones. So obviously it is important that when you do go into setups like that, that things are set out strategically planned, like, things like the water, the sweets on the table, the physio room, the times in the physio that you're going in and out of, having your own specific routines, whether that's mental rehearsals or physical routines. It is about bringing comfortableness to everything that you do, so that you're anchored in the here and now, as opposed to, because you know the way that the mind works, it loves to flip flop or yo-yo, as I say, between the past and the present. And in times of uncertainty, that's when that goes back and forth 90, you know. So it's about, how do we anchor ourselves in the here and now, prepare for the task that we're focused on, and how do we execute it, you know. So it's all about anchoring, bringing yourself back to the present moment, essentially.
So give us a couple of techniques to anchor us.
Again, I suppose, like, in terms, like, there is obviously loads of different techniques, but again, you're learning these throughout the year. It's not that you turn up. I remember I got asked this in a podcast recently. It's like, oh, what do you do in the hour and a half before you go onto the pitch and stuff like that? You know, it's like, how do you monitor that? And it's kind of like, well, you're not going to be throwing in anything really new here on our final day that could potentially dysregulate you or your performance. So it's about building the slow skills and techniques. I always say, like, in sports psychology, if you were to think of like a construction worker and they go on site for a day at work, like, they'll always carry their toolbox with them. But imagine if they turned up on site and they had like no spanners, no hammers, no nails, no nothing with them. Like, they're obviously not going to be able to execute the task or the job. Whereas if you have a bank of work done in terms of your self-talk, in terms of visualization, in terms of your diary keeping, in terms of your body language, your breath work, which is the biggest one for anchoring, and I'll tell you why in a second. But if you have all of those things in your little toolbox, of course you're going to be able to go in and execute a performance or a task, you know. But if we are talking about like breath work is probably one of the biggest ones in terms of your anchoring yourself back to the here and now. You know, you hear a lot of athletes talk about box breathing or the 4-7 breathing or the alternative nostril breathing, or progressive muscle relaxation. But most of our voluntary and involuntary systems are located in our diaphragm. So that is the quickest thing in terms of our central nervous system. So what potentially happens in times of uncertainty is we often enter the sympathetic nervous system, which is like your fight or flight systems, and obviously that's stress inducing, anxiety, potentially anxiety debilitating. So we have to engage the other part of our nervous system, and that's the parasympathetic nervous system. That's your calming, your regulatory system. And the quickest way to actually do that is through breath work. So it's not that when we go on All Ireland final day and we're sitting in Croke Park and we're thinking, oh my God, we have a minute and a half here to go, heart's going 90, you know, that like you start to become dysregulated. Then in that minute and 30 seconds, we would have done mass amount of work on breath work, you know. So they're kind of the key components. But if you are looking at it from a sports psychology point of view, it's infiltrate the skills and the techniques early so that we can use them and weaponize them when we need to.
I love that. Weaponize the skills. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had a great story in that podcast actually about the train up to Croke Park and noticing a couple of different things with players, whether they were saying it to you or you observed it. Just give us that anecdote again, because I thought it was fabulous.
Yeah, no. I suppose the beauty, like the good thing with Cork is obviously, you know, that you, again, I think people would be like, oh, it's the people's capital or blah blah blah, or not.
Definitely
But
not. Do
totally,
not put that in this
no,
podcast.
I'm. Hey, I'm a Kerry woman. I am not putting that in. I don't. The actual capital is Clarny. No, I'm joking. Um, but you know, obviously, like the transport system, like the train is something that they've religiously done in terms of how they get to Dublin and things like that. But in the 23 season in particular, like Saoirse McCarthy was actually quite sick in that All Ireland final. And I remember herself and Laura Hayes were down the back of the train, and like I would go around with water or Lucas Sport just to do like visual check-ins almost on everyone. And I remember we got to the back of the train, and the two of the girls, now they're the life and soul of any party. Even like you be conscious about energy, like expending energy, doesn't matter for them. They're like Duracell bunnies. So they were at the back of at the train, and they were both kind of sleeping, like legs in the air. And I was like, okay, this is weird. This is not okay. So I said to the two of them, I said, what's going on? And she's like, oh, I'm a little bit sick. I was like, okay, perfect. Take an allocated like 20 minutes nap or rest, but like get back up into the heart of what you're normally used to, you know, and that was key. And then like this year, I remember we were on the train, and this year we were privy to first class, first time ever. So it was lovely. But the toilet on the train was packed, and in carriage 2 and 3 was full of Cork camogie supporters. But I was like, had done the run through of the train and checked in with a few girls, and I was just kind of making my way down to, I think it was the third carriage, to use their toilet. And then I got a tap on the shoulder, and it was one of the girls, and I just looked at her and I knew straight away she was like dysregulating, you know, right in front of my eyes. Like she was panicking, her hands like were sweating, her heart rate was up. And she was like, Michelle, I don't know what's going on here for me. I'm just completely overwhelmed. And I said, okay, right, 2 seconds, come with me. And we actually both went into the toilet together. Probably didn't look the best, but look, went into the toilet together. And I was just like, okay, just like take a few deep breaths here. Okay, right, what's going on for you? And then she was able to relate like what had been like, and we had done obviously mass work on a one-to-one level with this individual. Like, so I would have known her triggers. And I just was kind of navigating and finding like what's going on for you, okay. And then obviously we started to change the narrative and start to change the self-talk, start to change the dialogue, started to do like the four in, the four out breathing. And next minute you could just see she just like her whole coloring started to come back. She started to just ground herself in the present and in the now. And I just said to her, okay, look, one thing that I noticed with you is like you love diary keeping or journaling, right? When you get back to your seat right now, look at the tasks and the objectives for today and write down exactly what you're feeling right now, just to get that, like, because obviously diary keeping and journaling is there's a therapeutic element in terms of gauging the mind and body together. Um, so it was about doing that. And literally got back down to her seat. I actually sat opposite her, but didn't look like, that we had just obviously had that engagement. It was just more just an informal kind of chat again. And she was bang, 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 bang. The next minute was completely back to herself, you know. But again, that comes down to knowing the individual and her trust in me and my trust in her that she had the right tool set with her to get through this. But like that's why I think like psychology is so important. Um that you have somebody like that on board. And I'm probably not the only one that has had an experience like that, on the way to All Ireland finals or to big events, to Olympics or whatnot.
What's the task and objective piece? If you don't have to share, but just interested in what it is.
In terms of
You were
what, or
saying
just the
go back to your tasks and objectives.
journaling.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. So in terms of the journal, like I would get every athlete that I work with to attempt journaling. I would never obviously enforce it on someone, but obviously there's so much research behind how effective it is. But in terms of like the task at hand is like the girls would have had a kind of a strict routine of like how the day was planned out. So specific time frames to go through what. And this individual would have been potentially coming on All Ireland final day. And it was just about seeing what were her tasks and what were her objectives when she came on in the position that she was potentially coming on. And it was just, again, like the way the brain works is that we have an orientation to fixate on something. Whatever we put in front of it, we run away with it. So I don't know if you ever heard like the High Performance podcast, but have you ever heard Chris Hoy's episode of the Pink Elephant? And it's like if I dangle the pink elephant in front of you, that's all you're going to be thinking about. So it was just a quick technique just to redirect her thinking out of a panic state, out of a stress induced state, and bring her back to like right now and what she needs to do in order to prep going into that final.
That reminds me of Bernard Brogan talking about Con O'Callaghan when he was in his book. He wrote about Con just reading and writing a little bit in his journal, just looking at it. And no one knows what it was, but it could have been something like that. So that's a direct something that it just resonated with there. That could be something that someone takes out of this, and I just think that's brilliant. The other thing, actually, the train. Interesting, right? So if a coach, I don't know, who's probably listening to that, be like, well, I wouldn't be doing that with my athletes. Why, even balancing supporters being in a couple of carriages down, that's another dynamic in
Mm.
itself.
It is, no, it is. And to be fair, I think it's the one thing that maybe like Cork do quite well is so like you obviously have, and it would have been different this year because there was obviously the intermediates were in the final. Um, and am I shooting myself in the foot by saying this now? I don't know. But in other previous years, the county board were always on our carriage, which I never thought was a good thing, if I'm honest. Whereas this year, because the intermediate final were ahead of us and on a different train, we're on the half 7 train, the county board went up there. There was only 2 members of the county board on our carriage. So in terms, again, it's all about like structuring your environment. It was about getting the girls onto the train. So like even where we were in terms of first class, it was at the very front of the train. So once we got the team loaded and all the gear and all that, then it was on about letting supporters in. So we didn't actually see them. This was like half an hour before we went off. And then obviously there was actually one incident. It was very funny. I was sitting at the front of the train and I was talking to Jer Manley and I was talking to Jennifer Megan. And one of the girls, it was actually Amy Lee, it was the goalkeeper. Amy Lee, brilliant girl on and off the field. Huge fan, amazing girl. But she poked me in the shoulder and she was like, hi, come here, you have to go start out down that down the back. And I said, what do you mean? And then like the minute I turned around and obviously there was a big glass doors, there was no joke about 20 little girls wanting to come through the carriage for photographs. So, and like signature naturally. So do you know what I mean? Like their heroes are literally in this first carriage. So I said perfect. So anyway, went down towards the train. All of the other girls were like, "Where are you going? How are you going to get them?" Or, you know, like, how are you going to get them to go, kind of thing. So I went down the back and I was like, "Hey, is everyone, you know, making it fun and jokey and exciting? Everyone here going for who's your favorite player? You know." Just to create a bit of engagement. I was like, look, guys, they actually really need to focus right now, and they're all about to nap and sleep. And I was like, promise you, if what areas are you sitting inside the stadium, so that I'll tell the girls to come over to you at the end of the game, and we'll try to bring the crop and we'll get autographs and stuff like that. And of course, then the girls like, oh my god, yeah, I'm in the lower Cusick stand, I'm in the Hogan down by the hill end, and straight away all the girls turned around and they ended up walking back to their seats. But you know, just managing that is really, really key, because obviously if you weren't experienced, you probably would have left them there. They would have been there for the whole hour and a half, and then obviously all the girls' attention would have been there, and then it would have drained them, you know. So managing your environment and the dynamics around it is really key.
I love the way that was your job, no one else's.
Do you know what it is? I think people think because I work with children and young people, that I would have a soft approach. Now, if Amy Lee was to go down there, Amy Lee has a great way. Like, she would have signed everybody's autograph. She would have gone down probably to carriage two or carriage three and had the crack with them. You know, like that's the type of character and person she is. So really, it was about kind of minding and monitoring the girls. And I was like, look, I'll take one for the team here. So I actually did bring a pen and a piece of paper with me, and I did write down specific areas in Crow Park where they were, and I just asked after the final whistle went and obviously the celebrations started. I did ask a few of the girls. And to be fair, that's one thing I love about LGFA and the camogie teams that I have worked with, is they're so open in terms of engagement after the games with the supporters. It's a really lovely trait and a way to be. So they were delighted with that. They got their photos and got their signatures at the end of the game for the All Ireland champions.
Yeah, they're very aware of the social responsibility that comes with being an elite athlete.
Yeah,
How do you find that? Because I was thinking about this, and David Clifford is one of them where, like, you know, Brian Fenton spoke about he was in a pub in Kerry, and basically people were going, it was nearly like Jesus, like people were touching him like he was Jesus. How do you balance the social responsibility of being a role model, but also conserving your energy and also your identity? Because, you know, and I think there is a difference in hurling, you know, and football, because they have the helmet on, and camogie and ladies football as well. Don't just want to talk about the lads, but there is a difference when you take off the helmet. You know, people might not recognise you, but you know, David's the exact same as he is in school, as he is in on the pitch. You know, he works as a teacher. So how do you balance that part of elite sport as well?
yeah, no, it is a hard balance. I suppose one good thing, and research has shown us that when we look at high performers, 9 out of 10 of them have a significantly high EQ. So emotional intelligence. And when we speak about emotional intelligence, that's the ability for you to manage yourself, but also to manage others around you. And I would say, like, when I look at David, um, like he would hold all those kind of core key qualities and things like that. And obviously, like, I think for the lads, like for instance, like Brian and David, is that like social support systems are huge. You know, the people that you surround yourself with, because even at home, like, I'm obviously from Kenmare, Timpano area. I have to say Timpano because Kenmare would get, you know, I'd get in trouble at home with Timpano if I said Kenmare. But I remember I was out last New Year's with my friends, and Declan Hannon was there with his wife Louise, and they were inundated, like continuously inundated. But I just walked over and I was chatting to Louise afterwards, because I kind of knew her through a friend. And I was just saying, like, how do you actually manage it? How do you do it? How do you find it? And I was just like, look, we choose to be in the limelight. We choose to be an athlete, and we choose to be, you know, a presenter and things like that. Unfortunately, that comes with the job spec now, is that, you know, you do have access to people all of the time. And she said, like, I'm not afraid either to know my boundaries and my limits of how much I can give to others. So I thought that was a really kind of important piece. And I think, you know, for any athlete who does maybe like struggle with those kind of pieces. Like, I know there was one or two girls in the setup kind of last year that were new into it, and they did find that social engagement quite hard. But it's all about, like, it's kind of like exposure therapy, you know, just like slow exposure to it, gradually kind of find your feet, what systems work for you, know your own boundaries, know your own limits. I think is really, really key in managing yourself in that environment.
When we talk about mental health and sport, you had a couple of interesting insights in the last podcast, but I'm going to rob a title of another podcast. It was more Trasny Kialig did a podcast series over COVID, and she did a great interview with Jessie Barr, and I thought it was just a fantastic episode. And their title of the episode was, if sport makes us, if exercise makes us happy, why are athletes sad? I'd love to throw that question to you.
Wow. Yeah. Well, Jessie's incredible as well. She's another individual that I have great admiration for, and like, oh, the work that she does is incredible. Um, repeat, what was the name of the podcast again? Just repeat it again.
I don't know what it's actually the series is called, but it's something along the lines of, the title is, if exercise makes us happy. And I think she was pointing at the
Mm,
endorphins that you get, when you're in low mood, they say motion changes emotion, so get exercise. But if you're an athlete, and they were talking about athletics, because that was Jessie's background, was, if you're a runner, then to clear your mind, you
mm,
might not necessarily go for a run, because it's just, if you've got a lot of things going on in sport isn't a way
mm.
of clearing your mind. So it's like, how do you manage the emotions that come with life when you are an athlete, and when exercise isn't the outlet, I think, is what they were getting at.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a great point, and I think, like, again, athletes are people. When we look at the research of the general public, is like 1 in 5 athletes will experience mental health related issue in any given time. That's actually significant. That's 1 in 3 when we talk about elite athletes. And like, we see things like anxiety. Your athletes are 30 to 60% more prone to anxiety than the general members of the public. Um, but at the very root of that, and like, again, it's understanding what like anxiety is and the role of emotions. Anxiety is a threat of something in the future, you know. Um, and all of those things are, like, obviously athletes train for future related performances and whatnot. Again, the role of psychology is huge, I think, in this piece, and providing a support system and an outlet for athletes is really, really key. So I think our focus, and for athletes, and when we do look at the SADS kind of piece, and how we tackle that, like, I think we have to build a platform, like, cognitive behavioral type therapies and coaching and things like that is really cool. But I think where you have to start from is really just understanding yourself as an athlete. Like, what are your boundaries? What are your limits? What do you understand about yourself? What are your triggers? And I think the more that you gain an understanding there in terms of controlling your emotions, and potentially like resisting distortions and things like that in terms of our thinking styles and patterns, the more we get to know about ourselves, the more that we can equip ourselves when these things present and come up. But that's why, like, as you said, there is a need for this type of service across the board, I think, for athletes.
One of the other things you mentioned about the train and handing out the waters and the Lucasade, which I think is a really nice way of hiding in plain sight and kind of being able to observe and check in. What are the other ways? I hope the Cork girls aren't listening, but what are the other ways that you're hiding in plain sight?
There's a few, like, again, I like to bring kind of like myself to every environment. Um, I think, like, being authentic yourself, so like you'd have different banters with different girls, like, so like that would be something that you'd often, engage with. Like for instance, I would say with the Mackeys, right? Katrina and Pamela Mackey, two of the greatest athletes to ever play the game. But like, they are like, nobody talks to them on the train. They are so focused in their own regime and own performance that, like, when you're passing through the carriage and they're headphones in, eyes closed, you're kind of almost like hesitantly waiting to see if they're going to open one eye, and you'd be like, giving a thumbs up or a wink. But then you'll have the table of like Saoirse McCarthy, Aoife O'Neill, last year with Molly Lynch and Amy Lee, and like the crack is 90. They're playing cards, they're having that banter, they're having that fun. They might even dial you or deal you in on a card game. It's so varied. Do you know what I mean? It could be as simple as, like, Hannah Looney likes popping on the beats and like being in her own world, but then she gets to a point where she's like, I have to be around people, and again, it does all come down to really just like knowing your athletes. And if you are talking about hiding in plain sight, it's just kind of maneuvering your way through different, because obviously there's different groups, different takes. People that sit beside the same people all the time, and it's about kind of having that relationship with each core person, and drawing on experience from that, if that kind of
No,
makes
it
sense.
does. No, it does. And my, like, you can nearly call it obsession now, is like, how do you manage the individuals within the group? And with yourself, I go down the rabbit hole of the motivation piece. Like, you know, and I've talked to coaches about how do you improve them, but how do you keep them? And it's not actually, well, it's not your job to keep them motivated, but when you're checking in with, let's say I'm on the squad and I'm number 33, and I know I've that good enough self awareness that I know I'm not going to get in, but I'm fighting for that 26th place. How do you keep, I asked Michael Fenley the other week, I was like, how do you keep 26 to 35 motivated? Because 26 to 15, you've got that piece of, you might get on, and then 1 to 15, you have your starting place. It's up to you to keep it. But how do you keep the 26 to 35, which to me, I actually think nearly indicate how successful you will be, is how dialed in and how driven that group of
Mm.
players are.
Yeah, again, like it is dependent on the team. Like I think the fortunate thing down in Cork is when I looked at the panel last year, 1 to 30, any one of the substitutes actually could have gone on that All Ireland final. Like you look at Emma Murphy, her transition when she came in, I think she was wearing like 25, 26, hadn't played a championship game the 3 or 4 games before that. And it's a testament to her. Like she was actually one of the best, I think, forwards in training coming into that All Ireland final. So in terms of those environments, again, it's those one-to-one check-ins. I remember I had a conversation with Ger. It was the Sunday morning actually of the Kerry Ladies All Ireland final, and we just have it like a weekly check-in on the girls because obviously you like allocate specific times for different people and all that jazz. And I just said I remember saying to him, is there anyone like that you particularly would like me to get ready? And he was like, yeah, 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 number 16 to 30. And I was like, okay, right. So we're sitting down with all the girls and we're going through this. So like you're very fortunate in an environment like that. It's probably a bit different than obviously at club level. But one thing I always kind of say is like, when you find your why, you find your way. And if you want to compete and to shift in those in terms of numbers, and like the one thing actually, Aura, that always stands out to me with athletes, particularly at intercounty level, I don't know why there's such an emphasis on a number. Like a lot of the problems that I have in one-to-one sessions is people getting upset with wearing number 27, 28, 29, 30. I don't understand it. Like the thing is, the crest is at the front of the jersey and it's right beside your heart. It is an honor and it is a privilege to wear it. So I think so many people get caught up on the number at the back when actually it means absolutely nothing. It's a number at the end of the day. Orla, like I'm not joking when I say this, that like I don't know how many sessions in county finals, All Ireland finals that people get upset, and that's the thing that you're dealing with is the numbers. Like it drives me demented, demented. No, and it's so funny, like when I think back when I played with Kerry, like I picked up my ACL injury in All Ireland semi final, and if you look at the program, look at the program, but if you do look at the program from the All Ireland final in 2012, like 16 is blank for the Kerry ladies. Like yeah, like, and that number, I don't have that. I did not want that jersey. I don't know what it was, that relationship that, like, it wasn't even that I had it with the number. I just did not want it. It just didn't represent something. And you think after all the years and like your childhood dreams, like I remember, this is mental now what I'm about to say, but I was 11 years old, I think, when Kerry men's lost to Armagh in All Ireland final. And I remember being so upset and so distraught by it that I ended up picking up a pen and a piece of paper and I wrote down my dreams. And one of my dreams was to play with Kerry in an All Ireland final in Croke Park. And I kept that dream in my gear bag from when I was 11 years old until I was 18. And then when I hit 18, I had the opportunity. Obviously, couldn't play, but I had the opportunity to go to Croke Park and to experience it. And I couldn't do it. I was not there the day that they lost against Cork in that 2012 All Ireland just because I just couldn't do it, you know. And I just remember the jersey. Like people have said to me, like there was a joke like a couple of years ago, and I was like, "Oh, geez, I actually have your jersey from that 2012 All Ireland." I was like, "Grand, keep it." Like it's funny, isn't it? Like how people, yeah, it's mad. Like it is bizarre.
Oh wow, that's amazing. That is amazing. Come here. I want to ask you though, in terms of the All Ireland final. So let's say even you mentioned debut. So I'm coming in. It's probably not going to be my debut in All Ireland final realistically. So I'm coming in for the first time the Cork senior camogie team, and I'm making my debut. You've got not on the day of the game, but you've got, let's say, Thursday night and the game Saturday. What advice do you
Mm.
give me?
again, I think like age demographic comes into play here too. Like if you're making your debut after transitioning out of minor level or even an intermediate squad, it may be a bit different for you. But if you're 27, 28, 29 years old and you're making your debut for Cork, it obviously can be a bit different. Like again, like, and I remember seeing this video. It was with, what's his first name? Some Gordon. He plays with Newcastle United, and he did an interview in a podcast with Gary Neville, and he was speaking about like preparation and things like that. And he was saying like if I have a match on a Saturday, like I'm preparing on the Thursday. So like again, if a young player is, for instance, a young player is going into a match and is making their debut, like it is, we do the physical check-ins, the one-to-ones and things like that. But again, it's that we would have had done work previously, um, on the skill sets, like things like visualization. Like visualization is so incredibly powerful, because what a lot of people don't realize is when we visualize and we create images, our brain can't distinguish between what's real, and what's imagined. So, like, we would be building a visualization or rehearsal, a mental rehearsal of what's potentially going to happen for you in your debut coming into a match. Like, obviously, you're going to more than likely know specification in terms of your position. So obviously we're going to be gearing up your mental rehearsal and those images, engaging all the five senses to the specific roles that you're going to be playing and things like that, just as a grounding technique again, so that like this isn't completely new to you, and this is something that you've seen and your brain has seen before. So it's about the visualization piece, it's about the self-talk piece. Like one of the things I always say to anybody that does transitions from like minor levels or from intermediate panels into senior panels is that like you know how to play the sport. You know, it's not that like what you're going in to do today is completely new to you. You know, this is something that you've been doing for 10, 15 years. It's a huge part of who you are. And like it's just like letting go of that pressure. It's just like go out and mechanically just do it,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know. So it's a combination again
Mm.
of different things.
Do you
But that's kind of what I would be doing
do you
with
ever
people
practice, maybe not in that scenario, but do you ever practice a negative, like if you're what you
all the
do?
time.
Yeah, okay, you do.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Again, like the one that jumps out to me there is that league final against Dublin in 2020, or sorry, that league final against Galway in 2023. Um, and hearing particularly one of the girls who would be a high profile athlete, that like when they looked up at the clock, they were getting lost in transition. So it was about building and recreating an image of that exact moment happening again, but with a different outcome,
Mm.
and kept reinforcing and rehearsing you enacting a different outcome. So I think again, the more you know about what could potentially happen, like I always say when people are using mental imagery, like ideally you want to enact positive scenarios, but it is important that you do see the potential skews or the potential negatives that might happen. But then it's about you either one, learning from it, so making a mistake, picking up what you can learn from it, and then reinforcing a positive behavior. So it's that kind of continual process, if that makes sense.
100%. Why I asked, and I was dying to tell you, I interviewed Daniel Whiffen. I don't know if this is going to be out or not when your episode goes out, but for a man that doesn't use a sports psychologist, does a lot of visualization. He dreams about a race 6 times before he does it. And I asked him, anything, did you ever dream of a negative thing? He said, never. It's only positive. And he says, that's one of the main things that I find my success from. It's the visualizing of the actual game. So when you're in the cauldron that is Croke Park, and we talk about the science of Croke Park, and I think what great teams and great players do is they find clarity in chaos. How can you how do you do that? How do you find the clarity in the cauldron that is an All Ireland final day on Croke Park? Like look back to the recent final last year. Galway are coming back. Time is ticking down. How do you find clarity in that moment?
Yeah, no, great question. I think again, it does come down to your systems and sticking with the processes all of the time. I think like if that happened, like in the previous years with Cork, maybe pre 2023, they would have crumbled. But I think the girls had done so much mental work, had been drilled into them, stick with the process, stick with the here and the now, anchor yourself in the present. Because obviously, what tends to happen in the brain is like when there is irregularities or things that we don't particularly like or are uncertain, that's when that flip flop tends to happen. And like, again, human beings work off mostly off two systems. The first one is safety, and the second one is your interest. And that's where I've always tried to encapsulate with any of the athletes that I work with. Okay, you mightn't be able to control the safety piece as such right away, but it's where you shift your interest and your focus and your attention. So things like, we had the win analogy, the what's important now or what's important next. It's about doing just checking in with yourself amidst the chaos. Like the one thing, the beauty, and this is a game management piece from a psychological point of view, was last year was just like going. I know it's so bad, but like going down with an injury just to reset.
Yeah, but everyone does it. Like you can
Everyone
say
does it. Like, yeah,
everyone does it. And even now, the fact that soccer have changed the rules for it, and only the keepers can do it. All the keepers are going down. The Welsh keeper went down last. When they played Ireland, they're all at it.
they're all at it. Yeah, but do by doing that, and like obviously we did have a specific call for that.
Yeah, every team
Um,
does. Everyone does
every
it.
team does. Every team does. I know the best ever, I'll have to admit, was last year's, or sorry, the 2023 All Ireland quarter final, Cork versus Kilkenny. And Kilkenny were just about to get on top of us, and we made the call, and Amy Lee in goal did it. Then the next match afterwards was Limerick, and Nikki Quaid did the exact same thing that Amy Lee, and it was scrutiny everywhere, all over. I don't know, can you remember that, Orla?
I do. Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, like they are key, they are game changing moments. You know what I mean? Even in the last year's All Ireland final, like that Emma Murphy substitute, she came off, Saoirse McCarthy was called on. It was the wrong, like the slip was completely wrong, and I wasn't meant to be Saoirse. So she went back on. Emma Murphy transitioned back off and was waiting on the sideline. But there was chaos everywhere else, but we knew what was going on and what was the plan and sticking to the process. And it just allowed us all to kind of just recheck in. Because I remember running down, I got a knock on the shoulder, and it was like, run down to, the steps in Croke Park. Obviously you're not allowed to go to the square and thing, but it was just like, I literally was like pointed the head, like to calm down and reset and just breathe. And like you could just see the messages flying in across, like you can actually see it on TV. If you look
Wow.
back at it, is just that, like there's just messages across the pitch that girls just need to calm, to anchor yourself in the now and just stick with what we're doing in the task and the focus at hand.
Because how often? Because that was going to be my next question. Like, how often can you influence in a game in the moment?
Rarely. Like
Mm,
obviously we're like, you set up, like when you talk about the Science of Crow Park, like I would, so like for instance, pre-game, like the parade, the presidential handshake, all that, like we all have specific routines for that.
yeah,
So like we know exactly how long that will take.
yeah,
We have specific plans for each girl. Like you'll see in that Ireland final, Ashton Thompson's doing the Superwoman pose
yeah.
for a solid 30, 40 seconds. You look at Hannah Looney when she's walking around doing the pitch parade, like she was talking to herself so much. I'd say people thought she was mad. Like, but
They
like
think
we
that
all have
anyway. Don't worry.
I know Hannah does build that platform for herself. She's one of the best people I know, and I honestly, she's incredible. Um, but like we have everything. There's constant cues set up in our environment all of the time to anchor us back to the now. But as you said, like when that chaos was happening, when Galway were coming back, and it was just a simple thing. Like I've never done that where I've gone down during a match and just give a shout. Um, and then just to see, like the girls just knew the message was just to regulate and just to calm down.
Who gave you the tap on the shoulder?
Um, I think we were all, now to be fair, I got a few belts from behind me. Jer was behind me, Jer Manley. And if anybody knows Jer, like as a manager, he's a very animated manager. Um, and I was getting a few thumps, like accidentally, all accidentally, but arms were flying left, right, and center. So I don't know, was it that or whatnot? But I just remember going because Emma Murphy was down at the side, and I could see she was starting to unravel as well. So you'll see me communicate with her as well in that piece. Um, so yeah, I did that, like again, but that was up to the girls to bring the calm and steady the ship. So in fairness.
That's what great teams do.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what they do. And that's unfortunately what they wouldn't have done in the years previous. So in fairness to them, they're the ones that have put in the work. They deserve all the credit because they are such an incredible group of people and athletes.
So going back to you, Michelle, how do you prepare for these big games? Because not only are these big players preparing for the game, you have to prepare these players. So how do you prepare?
There's probably a few avenues. I suppose like I've been working with people for the last 12 years. I myself have a psychologist. Obviously we have to have it for supervision purposes, but my psychologist is is key. So like I would have, checked in with her prior to the All Ireland kind of final. I think in All Ireland final week, everything is a bit chaotic. It's the last minute messages, it's the last minute check-ins. Like I think when I look back at the Cork All Ireland final, the Thursday and the Friday, I was actually in the Rochestown Town Park Hotel from quarter to 8 in the morning till 10 p.m. at night, working with all the girls. Every one of them had a check-in and a one-to-one. Some would vary from 20 minutes, some would vary to 2 hours. Um, and it was just about, again, like controlling the things around you. But for me, in terms of how I like, self-care is obviously a huge piece for me. Particularly I would have had an illness in 2021. I had a stroke. So I had to be very kind of conscious of stress and stress management. So like really, really monitoring my walk, like walking, getting out for swims, the ice baths. There's a huge thing that I'm really into. So just all those kind of self-care pieces is how I prepped myself, because if I'm not at 100%, how do I expect to give 100% to others? So it is really, really key that you are self-aware enough and that you have the right self-management techniques to really look after yourself in order if you are to look after others.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I do want to quickly ask about players coming back from, let's say, an Irish basketball team, a regional team, a county team, some sort of representative team to their their club, or the usual group of players that they're with, whatever level that is. What advice do you give to the players that are talented and great and play at a high level, and they come back to their club, for example, and I know of players that feel that responsibility and feel that pressure, and maybe it's not pressure from their peers, it's the pressure they put on themselves. What advice do you give those athletes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's so much science and research now coming out about like performance decompression. And I think that's really, really like that's something that I would do with a lot of my athletes, is that after, so much work goes into an 8 or a 9 month cycle, is that we do have a reflective piece and a piece to decompress before you actually enter or re-enter back into those environments is really, really key. So that's one thing that I would often talk about to athletes, is that you do have to have that decompression period. Then going back in, I suppose, at certain levels. To be fair, anyone that I've ever really worked with, there's very few that wouldn't have been within their club structure anyway. Like one thing I've always advocated for with any athletes that I work with, and I would have had fights with management teams over this, is that it is important to remember where you came from, and for lads or for girls to go back and always check in with their clubs and environments, so that it's not this big overload at the end of an intercounty season. Any athletes that I've seen who have done that have not fared out well in club championships.
Brilliant. I
Do you
love
know?
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's class. I love that, because then it's not like, well, how have the last couple of months been? You've been down, they've seen you, you've seen them, you know the lay of the land, and it's
hmm
just, it removes that first session back with the club. It's like, oh, I'm just going back down to the club tonight.
yeah, yeah. Like Amy Lee, to speak about Amy Lee again, like her club is in Therapeutic and she's the biggest probably club woman that you'd ever meet. But like we actually had a problem the last 2 years of getting Amy to not train with her club. Like she would be continuously down in the Piercing. And I did a little bit of work with their intermediate team last year. And like I'd see me like on a Monday and a Wednesday at, let's say, Cork camogie training. And she'd be at the gym on the Tuesday night down in the park. And then I'd be like, where are you going? She'd say, oh, I'm going home. And then I'd go up and I'd be up in the Piercy girls and she's there training, like fucking out. So like there's such a variety in those athletes, but definitely like I think like the continuum that they always see you, I think that's really, really important as an intercounty athlete. I know like schedules are hectic and busy, and it's not to say that you're there for every training, but I think having the presence around and them seeing you and you seeing them, it comes back to that trust piece too, that like trust is a two-way piece. If you're asking to go to war with somebody on a Saturday, it's important that you have that relationship and that they've seen you kind of throughout a season or a period.
What's the biggest thing that you wish you knew as an athlete competing at a high level that you now know?
Work with a sports psychologist. No, just because like yeah, like I didn't focus anything on mentality or mindset growing up. I think naturally, I think I had this kind of leadership skills, and I think that comes down to like I was never really the most book smart of people. But the one thing my teachers always recognized in me was that like I had an ability to communicate with people and build relationships. And like, now we know it as kind of like a higher level of EQ or whatnot. But definitely I think like when we look at the four areas of athletic performance or sporting performance, we have to look at the physical, the technical, the tactical, and the psychological. So many times you see where athletes fail or fall down on a psychological piece. And again, the mind is the thing that dictates everything else. Everything starts from the top to the bottom. Psychology influences physical performance. So if I was going back then, particularly even around injury, like if I had access, I did actually work with a sports psychologist when I was 16. I did 4 to 6 sessions and was like up this way, new way of thinking. But like if I had known those skills and techniques that I know now in all of my injuries, I think I would have fared out better. So that is the one thing I would say to any athletes, to any coaches, to any managers is start bringing in psychologically informed pieces into your environments. And I think you'll see that will fruition to success and to winning. And it's not all about winning or outcomes, but it'll definitely help along that path.
Brilliant. Speaking of winning, when we look at defining success, how do you define success, Michelle?
Happiness. I do. I think there's an unlimited supply of freedom and happiness. And I think if you're happy, you're winning, you know. You're winning at life. It's not always like everything's not going to be, rosy and stuff in the garden, but even like in sporting environments, if you create a happy, a fun, and an enjoyable environment and an environment that is safe, for you to be yourself, your true, most authentic self, then what else is there, that's happiness is the key, I think, in terms of success.
100% agree. In terms of the biggest lesson you've learned from sport, what stands out for you?
Biggest lesson from sport, what stands out for me? Um, that's another great question. What stands out for me? Just people at the heart of everything. I think like so many cultures look at just the athlete as an entity or an output or a product, but they lose sight of the human being and the person behind it. Um, we have to infiltrate cultures where there has to be a care on a human element before there is a care on an output element. Um, Everything that you do should be all about the human being and the person as opposed to just the athlete.
100%. The reason why I patterned it or put them together like that was Steve Kerr had a line. He's the head coach of the NBA Golden State Warriors and Team USA. And they had a Court of Gold series on Netflix. They followed a couple of basketball teams. And he said the common thread of winning teams, organizations, he has 9 NBA championships now, I think, is a combination of one, competitiveness, two, joy, as in like your own joy, you enjoying it, and three, is celebrating others' joy within the group. And I was like, wow,
Yeah.
he has figured it out. Um,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I
Yeah. Brilliant.
I do want to move on quickly to the sideline seven because we've actually been sitting for 2 hours now, Michelle. So I'm gonna have to wrap it up, but I want to get you back on in the future. We'll get it going. Maybe live from Cork at some point in person.
Live from Kerry to mine Cork. Live from Kerry.
Love that. Love that.
Sorry, I'm going to be killed for that. Like a few of the girls, when I actually left the Cork setup this year, a few of them were like, "Oh yeah, you're a Cork woman now," and I don't think I actually replied to a few of them because I was like, "I'm always a Kerry woman." Yeah, Kerry is the capital. Kerry is the capital.
And I'll wear my Dublin jersey down.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I'll try find that 2012 jersey and I'll locate and I'll wear that then too.
Brilliant, brilliant. Sideline seven, same 7 questions at the end of every episode. You've listened. I'm expecting great answers.
Oh,
Question
pressure.
question one, favorite quote.
Favorite quote. Change your viewing to change what you're doing.
Very good. Very good. Same as what we've spoken about already. Question two, best sporting event you've been to, and I'll split that into one as a fan and one that you've been involved in.
Fan was the 2023 Ireland versus South Africa game in France, the World Cup. It was unbelievable. Like when Dreams came on and the place was erupting, it was just, as a fan, it was incredible. I have probably two for the other one. Um, the first of those two was when the Kerry Ladies beat Mayo in an All Ireland semi final to get to their first All Ireland 10 years. I'd say three people know this story. And when we were coming off the pitch, I was walking along the 45-yard line on the hillside. And as you do, you'd be celebrating like the first time in 10 years that we had got to an All Ireland final. And Anna Gallivan came over to me and she picked me up and I picked her up in the air and she just muttered something to my ear and it was, he's here with us today. I can feel him. And it was in relation to my father, who would have been a huge influence in her underage career. And I'm not really like I'd be fairly good at managing my emotions. And I remember I just was overwhelmed with emotion and I dropped to the floor pretending to tie my shoelaces because I was actually crying so much. And the crying started and it didn't stop for about 45 minutes. And I ended up kind of drifting away from the team and going into the Cusick Park side because obviously the dressing room, because there was the game on after us, there was the dressing rooms. And I remember I went into the toilet and I just kind of came over to the corner. All the girls were going, like, in the management team were jumping and roaring and it was brilliant. And one of the selectors just came in and she just saw me. She just threw her hands around me and she just said, I know what that's about. And next minute, Louise Gallivan ran into the dressing room and she goes, look, I'm actually have to do a few interviews. Is there any chance, Michelle, that you can hold her son, Florian? And there's this beautiful picture and I'm in the physio room, like eyes red raw now, like had been like crying so bad. And there's a picture of me holding him. And that moment always stands out for me as a professional. And then I suppose the second one was again all Ireland final 2023 with Cork. We had a really tough year, really, really tough year. I think a lot of people don't realise the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Um, and like just that April, May time again with the losses and stuff like that, and the challenges that we had faced, and how the pattern of how we got to the final, beating Kilkenny, beating Galway, and then playing the way we did in that All Ireland. I think that was a really special moment because that was the first All Ireland that I'd won without my dad, and he was such a key influence in my life and very much the reason why I do what I do today is that piece. But that day in Crow Park, it was so weird. There was this white butterfly just like flotating around. And I was talking to Hannah Looney on the pitch at the half time of the game beforehand. And like this white, she was like, oh, there's a butterfly there. I don't know if she even remember it. And I just remember like, this is so weird, white butterfly. 2024 All Ireland final, same thing happened again this year. White butterfly just started circulating around. And I was just like, okay, like I was actually like, we're going to win today. I just like, I felt him there. They're the two kind of standout moments for me as a professional.
Wow. Do you mind me asking the 23 final with Kerry versus Dublin? From a personal standpoint, what did you learn after that game?
There was a lot of learnings. I think, again, we did kind of, as a management team, we did like a decompression piece. Um, I think we didn't get things right in terms of training load and management. Like something that we always used to do with Kerry was the day before an Ireland semi-final or a day before a final, we used to go to St. Jude's and do a session there. I know Katie Cronin and Louise have spoken about this as well. But they stripped that back. That was something that we had identified. Also to take away the emotional piece of Crow Park. Like a lot of the things that we would have done prior would have been around like videos from like family members and what it means to represent, like strip all that back. Um, they were kind of the essence. And the other thing too is like in fairness to Dublin that day, like they were incredible in that first half. I think a lot of people don't realize that Katie Cronin actually broke her ankle in the first 5 minutes and continued to play the full match. Like I don't think anybody actually knows that. Um, yeah, so like, and she was obviously on Hannah Tyrrell. So there's a combination of different factors that kind of happened that day, but definitely I think um those kind of pieces there was a few pieces like the training loads and how we managed the things prior to the All Ireland final that needed to change. And they did that thankfully last year and they got that All Ireland final. That was one of the best things to see and witness as a fan and as a proud Kerry woman.
And someone that I know you weren't involved, but it's someone that had, given so much to the group. Even though you're not
Yeah,
there, it's it probably still you do have that piece of work, and that in All Ireland is made up of a lot of years. It's not just 1 year.
yeah, no, definitely. And like it was nice because I still had five of the girls as clients. So, you still very much kind of feel part of it. But it was just when like I've heard a few people say this, but like when Louise was suspended in the air by the lads when she got taken off. And like what a lot of people don't know is that like that call actually came in via the comms from Anne Marie O'Donoghue, who is a selector and is a servant, a great servant of Kerry Ladies football. And I tell you now, there's no way that there's that title down below. in Kerry only. She's such a huge part of it. But that moment, I just remember I was like bawling. I was actually in a one-to-one session with one of the Cork players, and I said, "Do you mind? I have to watch this. Like, I have to watch this moment." And I just tears were kind of like just of joy, just kind of rolled down the face, just with how amazing that really was.
I'm going a little bit off track, but I do want to ask, what makes Louise so special as a player?
Yeah, it's her as a person. Like I know she has this unbelievable skill set, and she is uniquely different from everyone else in terms of how she looks as well. And I love that. But it's just her as a person. I think she's just so incredible. Like her years of service, obviously, like she's so incredibly talented, but it's her as a person. Like you should see her. She was always the first to training. She was always the last practicing free kicks. Like the type of standards and the principles that she set were so key. Um, that made her special. And the one person I actually always feel not sorry for, but in some way sorry for is Noreen Scanlon because she's there the exact same amount of time as Louise, has put in the same amount of service, is one of the most influential athletes, but probably doesn't get enough credit or never did get enough credit for who she was. And she was like, she has always been from a young age phenomenal. Um, so them two, they would always stand out for me as athletes and as people just because they are incredible.
Deadly. I do have to wrap it up, so I will go
Yeah,
back to
yeah.
biggest setback or challenge so far in your career, and how did you react to it?
Biggest setback. I'll be honest, I was very hurt, I suppose, when because I was initially meant to go back in with Kerry Ladies last year. We had a designated plan for my return. I had like the gear orders and things like that would have gone in. I think I knew there was an All Ireland there and I really wanted to do it. So that was probably the biggest setback at the time, but I think for them it was the best thing that ever happened because like Claire who went in just brought a new freshness and she was really fantastic. But at the time, when you're in it, it that was hurtful, but that was more the personal and emotive relationship that I had to the team. But in hindsight, it is the best thing that ever had happened.
On the flip side, then, your biggest achievement to date, in or outside of sport?
In or outside of sport, yeah, like biggest achievement to date. I'm a very family orientated person. I have three beautiful nephews. I think they're incredible. I love them, and the one thing I love is when you spend time with them, you just forget about everything else. Like you could be having the worst day at work, or you could be like so inundated with different things. But I think just everything for me kind of comes back to values and the systems that I grew up from and very much part of my identity. So, um, yeah, they're my biggest, I suppose, achievements is my amazing family.
I said it recently, the biggest learning last year for me was it all comes back to family at the end of the day. Yeah. Looking back, advice to your 18-year-old self?
Anything else has follow the path. Like I'm meant to be here today. Follow the path, go through all the hardships, go through all the mental health issues, like with injuries and stuff like that. I wouldn't be here today as a professional only for them. So, it all works out.
Question 6, dream dinner guest and why? And just
Oh,
make it a
Caroline
dinner.
Courage.
Make.
Straight
Brilliant.
away, I know I'm robbing your one.
What's your first question? What do you want to ask her? On a first question on a one to one, because
Oh,
different
what do I
obviously
want
the
to
thing.
ask her? Can I work with you?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, just be like, yeah, like how do you do it?
Yeah, deadly. Deadly.
Yeah,
Question 7, Michelle, the last one. If your life was a book, what chapter would this be called?
the start.
Setting up for big things, so
Yeah, hoping to anyway.
brilliant. I have to wrap it up there, Michelle. And a pleasure.
Brilliant.
Part 2 will happen live in Kerry with a Dublin jersey and a Kerry jersey on at some point.
Brilliant.
And I'll be sure to leave all your links and everything in the description so everyone can get in touch with yourself.
Yeah. Orla, thank you so much for having me. So, honest to God, it's a real pleasure to have been asked, and I've had a great 2 and a bit hours with you there now, and I'm definitely looking forward to that day down in Kerry.
Thanks so much, Michelle.